with us. Chuck has been here a few times, and he always brings a very encouraging and challenging word. So let's welcome Chuck as he comes. This is a multi-talented man. He's a musician, he's a missionary, he's a businessman, he's just a great smart aleck. And
but I'm not an MBE. Isn't it something to be in the presence of an MBE? I bowed today. I was getting him ready for the lordship thing. So I greeted him and said, your your highness. It's good that he lives in the presence of the king, not just the queen. That'll keep him humble, right? Very good. Well, it's great to be with you guys today. I'm excited to be with you. I want to we'll pull up the first slide here. I just want to give you a real quick little bit about me. That's the much better half, Diane. She keeps me sorted and keeps me going. And then the next slide is my family, and everyone except the little rat poodle. The rat poodle's gone. She went to doggy heaven. Some of us think she should have gone the other direction, but my daughter overruled, and so she's in doggy heaven. So. That's us. We live in Denver, Colorado. I've done a lot of things. Yeah. Somebody accused me last week of having lived 10 lives. I said, no, that's a cat, or 9, whatever it is. So I've built 10 businesses in 7 different industries on 3 continents, and someday I'm going to grow up. My mother always asked me. She died last year at 92, and she always asked me, Chuck, what are you going to be if you grow up? It was always if. It was never when. So I'm not sure growing up is actually all that. I think it's overrated. I have to. Yeah. I think keep the mind of a child, and I think we'll always be better off. Don't beat the wonderment out of your kids, and keep it yourself. All right, let's get into this today. Does anybody here think that God can use them? I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I think somebody asked me a couple years ago, what do you think is the number one issue in America? And my instant response was victimology. And that's really, I think that's the number one issue. We got victims everywhere. Everybody is saying it's somebody else's problem. It's somebody else's fault. It's somebody else who made this happen. And I think that's the number one issue in America is victimology. It's not my fault. In 1976, we saw the first Star Wars movie, 1977. I went to that movie when it was a B movie. Nobody knew what it was. And Han Solo and Chewbacca are trying to make the Millennium Falcon go into hyperdrive. And he's pushing on the gear, and it just goes, it just won't go. And the interesting thing is, the backstory in this is earlier in the movie you see Han Solo working on the Millennium Falcon, so he maintains it. Then you find out he owns the Millennium Falcon, and then he's driving the Millennium Falcon, and he can't get it to go into hyperdrive. And if anybody else remembers, if you're a geek enough, you remember what he does. He pounds on the console of the Millennium Falcon. He says, "It's not my fault. It's not my fault." He owns it. He maintains it. He's driving. Whose fault is it? And I thought, wow, I wonder, is that where we're going? And sure enough, that's where our society as a whole has gone, isn't it? It's not my fault. It's not my fault. It's somebody else's fault. Well, where did that come from? Because if you look in the Garden of Eden, we won't read this, but this is the text, sort of the basis for today. God created this garden, and he put all these really good things in there, and he put a few things in there that we shouldn't mess with. And he walked in the cool of the day there, and you can presume that Adam and Eve probably walked with him. And they had all of the best going for them. And yet somehow they ended up as victims as well. And if you look at the outcome of this, if you look at the outcome, what happened? What happened in the Garden of Eden or outside the Garden of Eden? It's a remarkable thing. I want to look at Romans 3 and see the result of the Garden of Eden. Because I think this is important for us as parents, as people who don't have kids, just for us to get a handle on on what we should feel guilty about and not feel guilty about. I think, John Heenan came from Our Lady of Perpetual Responsibility, but I think that guilt thing needs to be worked on. We should be less guilty than we think we are. So look at Romans 8, and let's look at the result. God put together this perfect garden and this perfect place where we could live forever and enjoy his presence and be and have a lot of meaningful life and raise children. They were already in that mode. But look what happened in Romans 3, verses 10 through 18, and then verse 23. As the scripture says, no one is righteous, not even one. No one is truly wise. No one is seeking God. All have turned away. All have become useless. No one does good. Not a single one. Their talk is foul like the stench from an open grave. Their tongues are filled with lies. Snake venom drips from their lips. Their mouths are full of cursing and bitterness. They rush to commit murder. Destruction and misery always follows them. They don't know where to find peace. They have no fear of God at all. And then Romans 3:23. For everyone has sinned. Everyone. And fallen short of the glory of God. Now, if you read this, if you're God reading this, God's reading his own word, and he's looking back in the Garden of Eden, and he's looking at the result. I think God has an opportunity here to be a victim, to feel like a victim. He did everything he could. He gave us everything we needed to get where we needed to go, and look what we did. I've toyed with writing a book where the title would be, God was the worst parent ever. Or was he? Because if you think about the result of God's parenting, that's pretty abysmal, isn't it? All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. There's not one, not even one, that's left. God could have been a victim. But there's something behind that helps us see differently. If you look at this, every one of us needs to take care of our own you-know-what. Can I show this in church? Is this okay? I can get closer and say the word God. Yeah, and we all need to take care of our own crap. And see, did God cause what happened in Romans 3? No, we did that. It wasn't anybody else's fault. And if you look in the Garden of Eden, Eve tried to, I'm surprised it wasn't the man, because it's usually the man blaming somebody else. God comes to Eve and says, why'd you do this? Well, it was him. He gave, that snake, he gave me the fruit. And we're blaming somebody else right out of the gate. But no, it's us who take the responsibility for this. And this is the basis for not becoming a victim, is seeing ourselves as people who actually will take responsibility for our own crap. So here's me. I was the fourth of four kids, and my mother and father both worked, both had very responsible jobs. My mother ran a rehabilitation center and a nursing home while I was growing up in the 60s, and my dad had his own accounting business. And by the fourth kid, they were pretty much done raising kids. And so I got to raise myself. If I left the house at 7:30 in the morning, came back at 9 o'clock at night, nobody noticed. And at 8 years old, I remember my dad was coaching baseball. That's American for cricket. And we had this. He would take his little league team to a farm field to warm up, and then they'd drive to the field, which is about 5 miles away. And I was down in the creek playing. I was not even old enough yet to play. I was just down in the creek playing, and I come up out of the creek. They're all gone. Everybody's gone. My mother, my father, my two brothers, and the other 27 people and their parents, they're just gone. And I'm out in the middle of nowhere at 8 years old. So I had to figure it out. So I walked the 5 miles. Took me about 2 hours. And I walked the 5 miles through the town, got into town, walked around, figured out where they were, and got down to the ball diamond and sat down on the bench. And my mom just looks at me. She was keeping score. She looks at me and says, "Where you been?" It was like the Home Alone movie. My dad had thought my mom had me. My mom thought my dad had me, and and that was just sort of my upbringing. I was sort of ancillary. In fact, I was told later on that the only reason they had a fourth child is in case one of them died. I was fire insurance. And then at 10 years old, I was sitting in a corner crying one day, and for a long time. And my mom finally came up and asked me what I was crying about. And I said, Mom, I just want to be loved. And my mom was, God bless her. She was an old farmer. She grew up in the Depression. She had one dress, the whole thing. And she didn't really know how to do that kind of stuff. And she just looked at me and said, well, son, that's not how you ask. Oh, okay. I'll try and do it differently next time. And I began, you can see where this is going. It's pretty easy for me. I've got a lot of stories like that. It's pretty easy for me to, I kind of start out with a little V, a little victim thing on my forehead. And pretty soon it became a big V. I'm a big victim. This isn't my problem. This whole thing is not my problem. And it gradually became more and more an issue. And by high school, I was called the quitter. If something got hard, it wasn't my fault. I just quit. I quit sports. I quit music. I just quit everything. And my friends called me the quitter, and my parents called me the quitter. I was just the quitter. And the end result was when I graduated from high school, I was in the bottom 5, probably the bottom 20. There were 525 kids, big graduating class. And there were 525 kids. I was probably in the 20th, and that 20th from the bottom, not 20 from the top. And they actually had me in the principal's office the day of graduation. It was like a Charlie Brown scene. I'm sitting there looking at all these adults' knees, and they're going, walk, 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 while they're talking about me like I'm not there. And they were discussing whether they should let me graduate. And the consensus was basically, look, if we don't let him graduate, we're going to have him for another year. Get him out of here. But I was convinced that if there were 524 jobs and there were 525 kids who were graduating, I would be the last. I would be the last man standing. I would not have that job. Everyone else would do it. They'd all have one, and I wouldn't. So how do we get out of this mess? How do I stop being a victim? It's a gradual process, but it has to do with us deciding to take responsibility. It is my fault. It is my responsibility. It's not even my fault. It's better than that. It's my opportunity. One of the things, my mother had so much wisdom, and by the way, I had great relationship with my parents over the years. We'll get to that. But one of the things my mother said that, mothers say things that are aggravating because you can't wiggle out of them. And she said one day, Chuck, there's no such thing as excuses. There's not even reasons. There's just priorities. Oh, really? Come on. That's annoying. I hate that. But I learned over time that we do what's important to us, and we live the way we need because it's important to us. And so I had to begin to make this journey back on my own from being a victim. And I remember going to college the first day. I had a full scholarship to music school, but they wouldn't take me because my grades were so bad. They made me go to summer school in order to see if I could even do the academic side before they'd give me the scholarship. And it was 25 miles from home, and I didn't have a car. And, of course, Mom and Dad are too busy, so I hitchhiked to school and to back every day for the whole summer. And the first day I'm hitchhiking to school, I'm thinking, well, let me see, I've been blaming my parents for this mess for 18 years. Who am I going to get to blame now? Let me think about this. And, nobody came to mind. And I realized, well, I guess this is on me going forward. And it was the first time I began to take responsibility for my life. And there was just a little light went on that God put on. And then at 21, I came to know Christ. I came from a background where we didn't have any Christianity in our background. We're pretty much secular people. And I came to Christ at music school, of all places, and at a symphonic music school. And then I went into the Army because I was pretty sure, again, no one would hire me. So I went into the Army because they won't reject anybody. And I'm sitting in basic training in my bunk the first week, the first night or two. And I had come to Christ, and I wanted to begin to do some healing. And so I thought, I'm going to write a letter to my mom. That'd be a good thing to do. And I started this letter to my mom. And the intention of the letter was going to be, Mom, I forgive you for being such a horrible mother. And I was going to write that letter. Mom, it's okay, really. I know, you had a lot of things going on. And, you weren't really very good at this, but it's okay. I love you. I forgive you. And I wrote the letter, and then I read the letter. And the letter said, Mom, forgive me for being such a rotten son. I'm looking at this letter. Mom, I didn't do things well, and I was terrible, and I made your life miserable. I'm so sorry. And I look at this letter. I didn't write this letter. That's not the letter I meant to write. But see, God was in that letter. And this is what we do too often. We look at what other people need to do. I'll work on my stuff after you work on yours. Yeah. And Mom, you get your stuff squared away, and it'll be okay. That'll be better for me if you get your stuff squared away. And the reality of it is we need to work on ours no matter what somebody else is doing, regardless of where they're at. That's their responsibility. That's not mine. Mine is mine. And what was I responsible for? I don't care what kind of parents I had. I was a rotten son. I know people who had, I think of this one girl at school who had a terrible parents, much worse. And she's just an absolute angel. And she has been her whole life. And she came to Christ shortly after I did. And just even before that, she was just a beautiful human being. So it's really on us to figure this stuff out. At the age of 24, this progression kept going. And I had a dad who didn't know how to say I love you and had never hugged me. I thought, well, I can be a victim there. Poor me, got a dad who doesn't. I thought, no, how about if I hug Dad and tell him I love him? And I came home from the Army one day and walked into the house, and Dad's there, and he stood up, and I hugged him, and I looked at him. I said, Dad, I love you. And he hugged me back. And ever since then, every time he saw me, he'd run right up to me and hug me. And then he learned how to hug the other 3 kids, too. And he learned how to say, I love you. And see, that's on me. What if I take care of my crap? What will that do for the world around me? Yeah. And that's what happened with my dad. He was better off. He was a better human being because I took care of my stuff. I wasn't trying to blame him or get him, Dad, I love you, because you don't say it. No, it was because I needed to be healed and I needed to be whole. And I needed to hug my dad and tell him I loved him. So 10 years later, I'm still working on this crap. And 10 years later, I began to get to where I looked at my childhood. Even throughout this, I thought, well, I had a crappy childhood. But then I began to look at what God said in his Bible, and I realized, maybe this was the right thing for me. My childhood was meant for good, at least. It was crappy, but at least it was meant for good. And I kind of got that far. And I keep working on this. And 15 years later, maybe my childhood was actually not just meant for good. It actually was good for me. Doesn't mean it was good, but it was good for me. And that began to creep in. And I began to embrace that. This was good for me. This is what I needed. And 15 plus years later, my childhood, probably more like 20 years, my childhood, I began to realize my childhood was perfect for me. Not perfect, because I didn't have a great childhood, but it was perfect for me. And how could I think that if it was not all that good? And the realization was that it was what I needed to go through to become who I needed to become, to have the ability to do things in the world around me and to share things and be somebody in the world that will make an impact on others who have had similar journeys who maybe haven't quite gotten there yet. Yeah. And that's really why God does this stuff for us. It's not because he's mean or we got shafted or any of that other victim stuff. It's because he wants us to figure out what is in that will make us what we need to become. And in the last 20 plus years, 30 years, maybe even a little longer, people call me the bulldog. I'm not the quitter anymore. I'm the bulldog. I just won't quit anything. It's annoying. My wife just says, would you please just leave the customer service rep alone? But no, we got to get where we need to go. And would you just drop this business? Move on to another one. And no, I'm not going to quit because God isn't a quitter. And I'm not going to be a quitter, and I'm made in his image. But it's because I've embraced this stuff over the years and I've seen it as perfect for me that I've been able to get there. And I trust there's something in that for you guys as well to begin to get there. Because my childhood compared to some of the childhoods was bucolic. It was wonderful. It was paradise compared to some. But, 1 Corinthians 10 says, no temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man, and God will not tempt you beyond your strength. So things that you've gone through that were worse than mine, or things I went through that were, it's because that was what God had for me, and he knew that I could go through that fire, and I could take that and embrace it and become something better, something new in my life. Great statement. I think Benjamin Disraeli is the one who said this. Treat victory and defeat as the imposters that they are. Because I want this to be part of what we're learning here this morning. One of the reasons that we're victims is because we're afraid to actually put ourselves out there. Because if we put ourselves out there and put a metric on it and put a time and a date on it, we might actually fail. And I call this being professionally confused. I don't know what to do. It's a victimology. I don't know what to do. There's so many good things I could do. I don't know which one to pick. Or what if I do something that's wrong? There's so many things. I don't know what to do. I'm going to wait on God. It just drives me crazy when I hear that. Look it up in your Bible. It doesn't mean sit around. Moses was out tending sheep, working hard when he got the burning bush, and Paul was on the road to Damascus, and he got blind. They're moving. These people are doing something even before they know the Lord. One of the things I've learned as a result of all this is this statement. Planning doesn't create movement. Movement creates the plan. And we don't like that. See, that's a faith-based mindset. Romans 1, from faith to faith, the righteous shall live by faith. Romans 1:17. We're designed to have a flashlight, not a floodlight. We get one step at a time. And we got to figure this out. But we live like victims because we're afraid of victory and we're afraid of defeat. And we've got to figure this out. So there's some mindsets that have come to me over the years on this. The Art of Possibility is a great, it's an interesting book because it was written by a guy who's a New Ager. And I read this book and I'm thinking, why hasn't somebody who follows Christ written this book? Why does it have to be some New Age guy? How come God is always having to use somebody out there because we can't figure this stuff out ourselves? Because there's incredible biblical truth in that. There's one chapter in the, he basically says, hey, we're all energy, and you'll never have this form of energy again in your existence, and so take advantage. It wouldn't get me out of bed for 6 minutes. His motivation for doing this stuff. But the fact is, we're made in the image of God, and so is he, and he's found truth. And the truth he found was about how to respond to victory and defeat. And his piece is a little different than this, but I'll preface it with my own. Victory and defeat really are imposters. We need to think of them a whole different way. Because see what happens when you get into victory? When you win the cup or you win whatever it is, what do? You go get drunk. And if you get defeated, what do? You go get drunk. And in neither situation are you learning anything. And we've got to figure that out. That this isn't about victory and defeat. This is about figuring out how to respond differently to the world around us. And in this book, in The Art of Possibility, Xander and Xander talk about the idea that victory and defeat should be treated the same. And I love the way they go through this. The idea here is that if you, no matter what circumstance you're in life, whether one that you think is good or one that you think is bad, no matter which circumstance, one response. Fascinating. Fascinating. See, that's the learner's response, and there's no victimology in that. If you lose, fascinating. How'd that happen? What can I learn from that to figure out how to do that differently the next time? That's fascinating. Don't go get drunk. Be fascinated. And if you win, fascinating. How'd that happen? Let's see if we can reproduce that. What did we do right? Let's figure that out so we can do it again. And you do that with your life in response to things that happen in the world around you. You do the right thing. You do the wrong thing. Don't beat yourself up for doing the wrong thing, and don't get all puffed up for doing the right thing. Just be fascinated. Isn't that a wonderful biblical principle coming out of this crazy book? Fascinating. And a friend of mine, Alan Weingarten is a friend of mine. He calls them seminars. That life is just full of seminars. It's not victory and defeat. It's just seminars. And I got this from John Heenan yesterday. John, thanks for this. I was going to put it on a slide, but I didn't take a picture of it. He has this little thing he put together for his business called Rules for Being Human. Rule number 1, you will learn lessons. I love profound, simple stuff. You will learn lessons. Holy crap, have I learned lessons. Number 2, there are no mistakes. There are only lessons. Rule number 3, a lesson is repeated until it is learned. Rule number 4, if you don't learn the easy lessons, they will get harder. And rule number 5, you'll know you've learned a lesson when your actions change. Isn't that great? Yeah. So for my friend Alan Weingarten, I'm going to take this back and I'm going to make a version that says seminars. You will have seminars. There are no mistakes, only seminars. A seminar is repeated until it is learned. If you don't learn the easy seminars, they will get harder. You'll know you've learned a seminar when your actions change, when you're actually different. Yeah, and let's go back one slide here. I got this from a movie. I tweaked it a little bit. I don't even remember what movie. 10 years ago, I saw this movie, and it had a line something like this in it. And the point of this, a man still finds his destiny on the path he chose to avoid it. The point of this is some of us are afraid to reach out and do something bold because we're afraid we might actually fail at it. And besides, I got all this baggage. It's not my fault. I can't do that because look at all the stuff that I came up with. But the reality of it is when you decide not to go after the brass ring, when you decide not to go after what God actually wants you to do with your life, that is a decision and that is a destiny. Either way, you're going to get somewhere. And a man still finds his destiny on the path he chose to avoid it. I think that's a powerful reminder to us that we don't get to weasel out. Hebrews 12:11 says, it is for discipline that you endure. And 1 Peter 2:9, I believe it is, says, to the degree that you share in the sufferings of Christ, to that degree also you will share in his exaltation. And those who will rejoice the most are the ones who took the risk to be salt and light and a fragrant aroma in the world around them, and to be everything that God wanted them to be, and to not focus on the victimology, but on how they could become something better than that. I think it's just a powerful reminder to me. This is the statement that has come out of this for me over the years. This next one. Circumstances don't make me who I am. How I respond does. You can see it in the world around you, can't you? People who have built lives around responding appropriately and taking the risk to reach out and to not think about the victimology and all that stuff. And they've gone this way. And then people who have very gradually created the habit of going the other direction and thinking about woe is me and the world is on me and I can't control things. And you end up having a very different approach to the world around us. Let's not fool ourselves. Circumstances do not make me who I am. How I respond to them does. You see this throughout history, and you see this in movies and where the tremendous joy comes at the end of the movie because the person responded the right way and didn't become a victim, and they fought through it. We have to figure out how to respond the way God wants us to respond. Here's the fun part. Let's look at Romans 8. John, that's in the New Testament. Just saying. He's so much fun to mess with. Romans 8. You know, the beautiful thing here is we're not alone. We don't have to do this on our own. I wasn't able to do any of that stuff on my own. That letter would have been, Mom, you're a rotten mother, if it had been up to me. And I wouldn't have ever said it's on me. And I would never have figured out that I needed to hug God or hug my dad because it was my dad's fault that he didn't hug me. And on and on and on. It would have all been on me. But the beautiful thing here is that there's nothing that can hold us back if we decide that we don't want anything to hold us back. And you know, if you think about that, it's a powerful thing to think about. And Romans 8 is where we find this stuff. I think this is this is sort of the you know, if the New Testament was a movie, Romans 8 is the peak. It's where everything gets resolved and it works out. Romans 8:35 through 38. Can anything ever separate us from Christ's love? Does it mean he no longer loves us if we have trouble or calamity or are persecuted or hungry or destitute or in danger or threatened with death? As the scriptures say, for your sake we are killed every day. We are being slaughtered like sheep. Poor victims. No. Despite all these things, overwhelming victory is ours through Christ who loves us. And I am convinced, this is just one of the most powerful things in the Bible, isn't it? I am convinced, can you just see Paul writing this down? The resolute, it's over, it's done. I am convinced that nothing can ever separate us from God's love. Neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor demons, neither our fears for today, nor our worries about tomorrow. Not even the powers of hell can separate us from God's love. No power in the sky above or in the earth below. Indeed, nothing in all creation will ever be able to separate us from the love of God that is revealed in Christ Jesus our Lord. So, I mean, think about that. It's one thing to have to put up with this on your own. It's another thing for us to be in a position. It's one thing for us to put up with this on our own, but it's a whole other thing for us to be in a position where we have such support. We've got the body of Christ. We've got Christ himself. We've got the score. You know, the game's over. We're reading the score. We win. What else do you need to pull yourself out and not be a victim? And I put the process up there for you because I want you to know that it's a process. I didn't come to this overnight. The healing was long. But it doesn't have to be forever, and it doesn't have to take that long. But it's a road, and it's one decision at a time to do things the right way and to be fascinated instead of being the victim. So I'll leave you with this one thought. Someday your life might flash before you. If it does, make sure it's worth watching. Thanks.